once put me at ease. After a few general questions about my background and legal education, he asked me whether my last name was Swedish. When I told him that it was, he began to reminisce about some of the Swedish clients he had had while practicing law in upstate New York. I genuinely enjoyed these anecdotes, but somehow I felt I should be doing more to make a favorable impression on him. He, however, seemed quite content to end the interview with a courteous thanks for my having come by, and I walked out of the room convinced that he had written me off as a total loss in the first minutes of our visit. I was naturally surprised, therefore, to receive a letter from him in November 1951 telling me that his efforts to get by with only one law clerk that term were not working out well, and that he and the clerk felt that some added assistance was in order. I had told him that because of my studying through the summers I would graduate from Stanford in December, and he requested that I come to Washington on February 1st, 1952, and planned to serve as his clerk from then until June 1953. Delighted by this quite unexpected offer, I accepted it immediately. Now, as I crossed the Ohio River at Wheeling, West Virginia, I noted the steady lowering of the southeastern sky, and by the time I was in Pennsylvania, it had started to snow. An hour or so later, when I angled south across the Pennsylvania line into western Maryland, it was snowing hard. I was following U.S. Route 40, the old national road, which would take me to within 40 miles of Washington. I pulled up at a Shell station on the outskirts of Cumberland, Maryland, and took another look at the weather. I guessed the visibility to be no more than a quarter of a mile, and I decided I was indeed hitting the tail end of the weather system moving eastward over the Appalachians. I held my speed down, which wasn't hard to do in the Studebaker. I came over the mountains, went through Hagerstown, and climbed back over the Blue Ridge without much improvement in visibility. But when I finally turned south toward Frederick, the skies began to brighten and the snow stopped. During the last 40 miles from Frederick to Washington, the sun emerged from behind the clouds, and I had the feeling that it was personally welcoming me to the nation's capital. I was fortunate to have a hospitable great-aunt who lived in the northwest part of Washington near Chevy Chase Circle. She had been widowed 4 years previously and had generously undertaken to put me up until I found a permanent place to stay. She gave me a very pleasant bedroom in her house, and I spent the day after my arrival getting my bearings in the city and working out a route to cover the rather long distance between her house and the Supreme Court building. The following day, February 1st, 1952, I proceeded to follow that route, south on Connecticut Avenue to DuPont Circle, then southeast on Massachusetts Avenue to Capitol Hill. From Maryland Avenue, where I parked, one sees the north wing of the Supreme Court building. I walked around to the plaza in front of the main entrance to the building and stood for a moment to admire it. I had been in Washington only once before in my life, when I came with my cousins from Iowa between my junior and senior years in high school. But I had absolutely no recollection of having seen the Supreme Court building. As I looked at it now, I felt sure that I would have remembered it. Behind me and across the Capitol Plaza was the United States Capitol, with its familiar dome thrusting up into the chilly gray February sky. In front of me was the main portico that provided entrance to the Supreme Court building, flanked on either side by two large seated marble figures. The portico itself is supported by 16 massive Corinthian marble columns. Above these, on the architrave, is inscribed in large letters the familiar phrase, "Equal justice under law." Capping the entrance is a pediment with the sculptured group in bas relief. The whole impression is of a magnificent Greek temple of white marble, flanked by low wings extending outward on each side. I climbed the seemingly endless steps leading up to the front entrance of the building, opened the large door, and walked through a vestibule into the great hall, and here I again paused to feast my eyes on the sight. The ceiling looked to be at least 20 feet high, and on each side were double rows of marble columns. Arrayed along each side of the hall in niches designed for that purpose were busts of the 11 former Chief Justices of the court, from John Jay to Harlan F. Stone. But what impressed me as much as the architecture was how quiet the great hall was. With the exception of the guard on duty, I was the only person there. I explained my mission to the guard to report for work to Justice Jackson, and he directed me to